I still remember it like it was yesterday. One of the very first Nike shoes I ever owned. A small, purple and white Nike Dunk made for 10-year-olds. I didn't just like them. I loved them deeply. Not just because they were beautiful or rare. Not just because they felt good on my feet. But because when I wore them, I felt like someone else. Someone cooler. Someone more confident. Someone who belonged. That little pair of shoes made me feel seen. They made me feel interesting, desirable, like I was a part of something. And at 10 years old, I desperately needed that kind of validation. Today, I no longer tie my worth to what I wear, thank God. But I'll never forget that power that a simple, man-made object had, not just on my outfit, but on my identity. The idea that a product could do that it could make someone feel stronger, more capable, more like their best self, that is something I deeply admire. And honestly, that's something I want to dedicate my life to. Creating things that make people feel better in their own skin, that elevate them, inspire them, help them grow. So, where do you begin if you want to build something that meaningful? For me, the answer was obvious. You start by learning from the men who started the company that made you feel like you mattered. And in today's episode, I'm diving into the autobiography of Phil Knight, the creator of Nike. Not to summarize everything, but to share with you the lessons that moved me, the ones that made me think, feel, and reflect. Of course, your takeaways might be different, and honestly, I hope they are, because this one is the most captivating autobiographies I've ever read. The storytelling alone is cinematic. I still don't understand how it hasn't been made into a movie. That foggy morning, that momentous morning in 1962, I'd recently blazed my own trail, back home, after 7 long years away. It was strange being home again. Strange being lashed again by the daily rains. Stranger still was living again with my parents and twin sisters, sleeping in my childhood bed. Late at night, I'd lie on my back, staring at my college textbooks, my high school trophies and blue ribbons, thinking, this is me? Still? On paper, I thought. I'm an adult. Graduated from a good college, earned a master's from a top business school, survived a year-long hitch in the U.S. Army. My resume said I was a learned, accomplished soldier, a 24-year-old man in full. So why, I wondered, why do I still feel like a kid? This is something I ask myself so frequently nowadays. It's just so relatable. Worse, like the same shy, pale, rail-thin kid I'd always been. Maybe because I still hadn't experienced anything of life. Least of all, its many temptations and excitements. I hadn't smoked a cigarette, hadn't tried a drug. I hadn't broken a rule, let alone a law. I couldn't think of one time I'd cut loose, done the unexpected. I'd never ever been with a girl. God, as I'm reading this, I remember this thing from Good Will Hunting, the movie. So I rewatched Good Will Hunting the other day. And it just occurred to me that this is so similar. So Sean, Will's therapist in the movie, says, thought about what you said to me the other day about my painting. Stayed up half the night thinking about it. Something occurred to me. Fell into a deep, peaceful sleep and haven't thought about you since. Do you know what occurred to me? And Will says no. Sean says, you're just a kid. You don't have the faintest idea what you're talking about. He says, you've never been out of Boston. So if I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo, you know a lot about him. Life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope. The whole works, right? But I'll bet you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at the beautiful ceiling, seen that. If I ask you about women, you'd probably give me a syllabus about your personal favorites. You may have even been laid a few times. But you can't tell me what it feels like to wake up next to a woman and feel truly happy. You're a tough kid. and I'd ask you about war, you'd probably throw Shakespeare at me, right? Once more into the breach, dear friends. But you've never been near one. You've never held your best friend's head in your lap, watch him gasp his last breath, looking to you for help. I'd ask you about love, you'd probably quote me a sonnet. But you've never looked at a woman and been totally vulnerable, known someone that could level you with her eyes, feeling like God put an angel on earth just for you, who could rescue you from the depths of hell. And you wouldn't know what it's like to be her angel, to have that love for her, be there for her, be there forever, through anything, through cancer. And you wouldn't know about sleeping sitting up in the hospital room for 2 months, holding her hand, because the doctors could see in your eyes that the terms visiting hours don't apply to you. You don't know about real loss, because it only occurs when you've loved someone more than you love yourself. And I doubt you've ever dared to love anybody that much. And look at you. I don't see an intelligent, confident man. I see a cocky, scared, shitless kid. But you're a genius, Will. No one denies that. No one could possibly understand the depths of you. But you presume to know everything about me because you saw a painting of mine and you ripped my F-life apart? You're an orphan, right? And Will nods. You think I know the first thing about how hard your life has been, how you feel, who you are because I read Oliver Twist? Does that encapsulate you? Personally, I don't give a shovel about all that. Because you know what? I can't learn anything from you. I can't read in some F book unless you want to talk about you, who you are. Then I'm fascinated. I'm in. But you don't want to do that, do you, sport? You're terrified of what you might say. Your move, Chief. And so yeah, it's like Phil Knight is saying that he didn't experience anything in life. And it's impossible to experience life through books. It's impossible to know what life is like through books. You have to live life. You have to love. You have to break laws. Then you would know what life is like. Let us go back to Phil Knight. If I tended to dwell on all the things I wasn't, the reason was simple. Those were the things I knew best. I'd have found it difficult to say what or who exactly I was or might become. Like all my friends, I wanted to be successful. Unlike my friends, I didn't know what that meant. Money? Maybe. Wife? Kids? House? Sure, if I was lucky. These were the goals I was taught to aspire to. And part of me did aspire to them, instinctively. But deep down, I was searching for something else. Something more. I had an aching sense that our time is short. Shorter than we ever know. Short as a morning run. And I wanted mine to be meaningful and purposeful and creative and important. Above all, different. I wanted to leave a mark on the world. I wanted to win. No, that's not right. I simply didn't want to lose. And then it happened, as my young heart began to thump, as my pink lungs expanded like the wings of a bird. As the trees turned to greenish blurs, I saw it all before me. Exactly what I wanted my life to be. Play. Yes, I thought. That's it. That's the word. This is all so relatable. Like, every single thing that he says could be things I would say over and over again every day. Maybe it's the 20s. Maybe that's what 20s are like. Or maybe we are different. Us chasers. Maybe we are going to make something different and leave a mark on the world, hopefully. He continues, what if there were a way, without being an athlete, to feel what athletes feel? To play all the time instead of working? Or else to enjoy work so much that it becomes essentially the same thing? And what does Naval Ravikant say? If you remember, if you've watched episode 9 of this podcast, find work that feels like play. Pick an industry where you can play long-term games with long-term people. Play! Again, the word play. Play iterated games. All the returns in life, whether in wealth, relationships, or knowledge, come from compound interest. So, what is the end game of a career? Of work? Of all those years we spend building, chasing, hustling? It's not just money. We defined that in the last episode. It's not even success. It's about finding a game. Your game. One you'd be willing to play every day for the rest of your life. People like Kobe Bryant, for example. I've watched a motivational video a couple of hours ago about Kobe Bryant. And you can definitely notice that he has found the work of his life. He says that everything in this life he uses for his game, for basketball. He watches basketball films. He reads books about basketball. Every conversation he has is about basketball. And so that was a play he was willing to play every day, every single minute of his life, and for the rest of his life, just for the love of it. And yeah, so that's the first and maybe most powerful lesson I took away from this book, which is play. Find the thing that doesn't feel like work. Find the game that makes you come alive and play it with everything you've got. As Phil Knight says, like it or not, life is a game. Whoever denies that truth, whoever simply refuses to play, gets left on the sidelines. And I didn't want that. More than anything, that was the thing I did not want. Which led me as always to my crazy idea. Maybe, I thought, just maybe, I need to take one more look at my crazy idea. Maybe my crazy idea just might work. Maybe. No, I thought, running faster and faster. Running as if I were chasing someone and being chased all at the same time. It will work. By God, I'll make it work. No maybes about it. I was suddenly smiling, almost laughing. At 24, I did have a crazy idea. And somehow, despite being dizzy with existential angst and fears about the future and doubts about myself, as all young men and women in their mid-20s are, I did decide that the world is made up of crazy ideas. History is one long procession of crazy ideas. The things I loved most, books, sports, democracy, free enterprise, started as crazy ideas. For that matter, few ideas are as crazy as my favorite thing, running. It's hard, it's painful, it's risky. The rewards are few and far from guaranteed. When you run around an oval track or down an empty road, you have no real destination, at least none that can fully justify the effort. The act itself becomes the destination. It's not just that there's no finish line, it's that you define the finish line. Whatever pleasures or gains you derive from the act of running, you must find them within. It's all in how you frame it, how you sell it to yourself. Every runner knows this. You run and run mile after mile, and you never quite know why. You tell yourself that you're running towards some goal, chasing some rush. But really, you run because the alternative, stopping, scares you to death. So that morning in 1962, I told myself, let everyone else call your idea crazy. Just keep going. Don't stop. Don't even think about stopping until you get there. And don't give much thought to where there is. Whatever comes, just don't stop. And this parable, this analogy with running is so relatable again for me as well, because I usually run on the weekends on the treadmill. And if you're running on a treadmill, you've got absolutely no real destination. It's like you're running and you don't know where you're going. And sometimes you're even exhausted. You feel like you can't keep up anymore. And still you convince yourself from within that you can keep running, that you're going to beat yourself this time, that you're not going to die, and that you're not going to stop. Because, as he says, the alternative, stopping, scares you to death. Imagine stopping. Anyways, that is absolutely something I can relate to again. And there are actually quite a few lessons hidden in this second story. One of the biggest ones for me is this. Crazy ideas aren't really crazy. If you remember the first episode, Apple's Think Different ad, what does it say? The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So, crazy again. We say some things are crazy, but actually, they're not really crazy. They're just ideas that sometimes feel like they come to us for a reason. Like we're the ones meant to bring them to life. I mean, why else would that idea come to you specifically? Maybe it's because you're the best person to make it happen, or at least the one willing to try. But of course, to do that, you need a bit of faith in yourself. And like Phil Knight says, have faith in yourself, but also have faith in faith. Not faith as others define it, faith as you define it, faith as faith defines itself in your heart. We just need enough faith, enough courage to take the first step, to chase that idea. Because maybe, just maybe, that idea could change the lives of thousands, maybe even millions. And then comes the third lesson. It's completely okay not to know what you want to do with your life, to feel lost, to be young and confused and full of doubt. We all are. And one day things might start to feel a little bit clearer. And even if they don't, even if the path stays a little blurry, that's okay too. That's human. That's life. And there's a quiet kind of beauty in that. And the fourth lesson, maybe the most important of all, is don't stop. Keep going. Even when it's hard, even when it feels like nothing is working. But that doesn't always mean never give up. Like Phil Knight says, and those who urge entrepreneurs to never give up, charlatans. Sometimes you have to give up. Sometimes knowing when to give up, when to try something else, is genius. Giving up doesn't mean stopping. Don't ever stop. And that lesson, the one about not stopping, ties so beautifully into one of my favorite examples in the book. Because if you protect your dreams, if you hold on to them tightly and just keep going, no matter how long it takes, if you keep walking, never entertaining the thought of quitting, then one day, maybe slowly, maybe all at once, you'll find yourself standing in the life you once wished for. And that brings us to a story from Phil's early journey, one that we'll explore more deeply in the next lesson. It's 1962, and he decides to travel the world. I moved slowly, as if in a nightmare, through Manila, through endless crowds and fathomless gridlock, toward the hotel where MacArthur once occupied the penthouse. I wanted to book a night in his former suite, but I couldn't afford it. One day, I vowed, one day I shall return. And then in 1976, 14 years later, he returns to Asia, this time not as a wandering traveler, but on a business trip. A lot had changed since that first journey. Now he had Nike. It wasn't perfect, and he wasn't exactly wealthy yet, but he had built something real, and he managed to achieve what he wanted. He says, I sent Gorman home ahead of me. Before leaving Asia, I told him, I needed to make one quick stop in Manila. Personal errand, I said vaguely. I went to Manila to visit a shoe factory, a very good one. Then, closing an old loop, I spent the night in MacArthur's suite. And similar to that would be this story here, which also echoes the fact that the biggest, most important moments in life often happen quietly, behind closed doors in the silence for decades, and then suddenly everything changes. So it's 1980, the night before Nike is about to go public, a moment that would change the course of the company forever. I fell asleep for a few hours. When I woke, it was cold and rainy. I went to the window. The trees were dripping water. Everything was mist and fog. The world was the same as it had been the day before, as it had always been. Nothing had changed, least of all me. And yet I was worth $187 million. I showered, ate breakfast, drove to work. I was at my desk before anyone else. Let's talk about lesson number 5. When I broached the subject with my father, when I worked up the nerve to speak to him about my crazy idea, I made sure it was in the early evening. That was always the best time with Dad. So just for a bit of context, the crazy idea Phil's referring to actually started as a research paper he wrote back at Stanford. In it, he argued that Japanese running shoes had the potential to seriously disrupt the shoe market, which at the time was completely dominated by German brands like Adidas. It was bold, a little unexpected, but as we'll see, it wasn't so crazy after all. Through the rest of my time at Stanford, through every morning run and right up to that moment in the TV nuke, I'd pondered going to Japan, finding a shoe company, pitching them my crazy idea, in the hopes that they'd want to partner with a shy, pale, braille-thin kid from Sleepy, Oregon. I'd also toyed with the notion of making an exotic detour on my way to and from Japan. How can I leave my mark on the world, I thought, unless I get out there first and see it. Before running a big race, you always want to walk the track. A backpacking trip around the globe might be just the thing, I reasoned. Before I died, became too old, or consumed with everyday minutiae, I wanted to visit the planet's most beautiful and wondrous places, and its most sacred. Of course, I wanted to taste other foods, hear other languages, dive into other cultures. But what I really craved was connection with a capital C. But first, I'd need my father's approval. More, I'd need his cash. Lesson 5 touches on something that echoes across the journey of almost every single founder, a theme David Senra from Founders Podcast often highlights. It's the idea that behind every visionary, there's often a quieter story shaping them, and that story usually begins with their father. Francis Ford Coppola, the filmmaker, said it best. You can always understand the son by the story of his father. The story of the father is embedded in the son. And this theme is everywhere in Shoe Dog. Whether it's Phil Knight's own complicated, deeply human relationship with his father, or the emotional moment when his very first employee, Johnson, considers resigning, or even when Nike's future rests on a single courtroom battle. And the exceptional lawyer Strasser, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but steps in to defend them. Each of these stories reflect the weight and legacy of those who came before, and how that shapes who we become. As Phil puts it when they invite Strasser to join the company back in 1973. More than anything else, we bonded over fathers. Strasser was the son of a successful businessman, and he too feared that he'd never live up to his old man's expectations. His father, however, was an exceptionally hard case. Strasser told me many stories. One stayed with me. When Strasser was 17, his parents went away for the weekend. And Strasser, God, I don't know how to pronounce this name and it comes up everywhere. Anyways, and Strasser seized the moments to throw a party. It turned into a riot. Neighbors called the police, and just as the patrol cars arrived, so did Strasser's parents. They'd come home early from their trip. Strasser told me that his father looked around, house in shambles, son in handcuffs, and coldly told the cops, "Take him away!" Then came 1974. They asked Strasser to officially join Nike, the company that was still young, still fragile, still fighting to survive. They gave him their best pitch, laid everything on the table, but he didn't say yes. So they asked him something simple, something real. "What's up?" I said. "I need to ask my dad," he said. I looked at Hayes. We both guffawed. "Your dad?" Hayes said. "The same dad who told the cops to hold Strasser away." I shook my head. The one argument Hayes and I hadn't prepared for. The eternal pull of the old men. And it keeps happening time and time again, even after years when Phil has accomplished more than anyone ever thought possible. There's still a part of him that yearns to live up to his father's expectations. He says, "In his final 6 months, I was able to take my father on a long trip, to put to rest the eternal question of whether he was proud, to show him that I was proud of him. We went around the world, saw Nikes in every country we visited, and with every appearance of a swoosh, his eyes shone. The pain of his impatience, his hostility to my crazy idea, it had faded. It was long gone. but not the memory. Fathers and sons, it's always been the same since the dawn of time. My dad, Arnold Palmer, once confided to me at the Masters, did all he could to discourage me from being a professional golfer. I smiled. You don't say. Lesson 6 is one that might not be easy for everyone to relate to, but it's one that's so important, for me at least. It's okay to be shy, to not always feel courageous enough. From everything I've read, Phil Knight was one of the shyest people you could meet. He wasn't always bold or fearless, and yet he achieved more than anyone could have imagined. And that's okay. Being shy doesn't mean your life has to be dull or insignificant. What matters is that you try, that you take that first step, even when it's hard. This reminds me of a moment from the movie We Bought a Zoo, where Matt Damon says, "Sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage. Just 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery. And I promise you, something great will come of it." That tiny moment of courage, that small leap, can change everything. Lesson 7 brings us to the power of adventure. How can I leave my mark on the world, I thought, unless I get out there first and see it. Phil Knight's realization about the importance of stepping out and seeing the world is a powerful one. It also brings to mind a scene from Little Women, where one of the Marsh sisters sets off for a journey abroad, and the professor asks her mother, Marmee, "Do you think it's a good idea for her to go away like this?" And Marmee's response is, "Girls have to go into the world and make up their own minds about things." I truly believe that these stories hold profound lessons. Traveling the world, experiences new cultures, meeting people, and navigating unfamiliar challenges. It all helps you grow into a stronger, more resilient version of yourself. It makes you more mature, less naive, and far more capable of handling the hurdles that come with building something meaningful like a business. Let's talk about lesson number 8, one of the most powerful and recurring theme in this book, belief and passion. Because at the end of the day, that's what makes all the difference. He says, "My sales strategy was simple, and I thought rather brilliant. After being rejected by a couple of sporting goods stores, I drove all over the Pacific Northwest to various track meets. Between races, I'd chat up the coaches, the runners, the fans, and show them my wares. The response was always the same. I couldn't write orders fast enough. Driving back to Portland, I'd puzzled over my sudden success at selling. I'd been unable to sell encyclopedias and I'd despised it to boot. I'd been slightly better at selling mutual funds, but I'd felt dead inside. So why was selling shoes so different? Because I realized it wasn't selling. I believed in running. I believed that if people got out and run a few miles every day, the world would be a better place. And I believed these shoes were better to run in. People, sensing my belief, wanted some of that belief for themselves. Belief, I decided. Belief is irresistible. And honestly, it's the same thing we see with people like Steve Jobs, right? He believed so deeply in his product. He knew it was the future, that it would change the world. That kind of conviction is magnetic. When people saw how much he believed, they wanted to believe too. They wanted a piece of that future he saw so clearly. And that brings us to lesson number 9. Nothing is ever great in the beginning. That doesn't mean you shouldn't start, and it definitely doesn't mean you should stop. What matters is starting anyway and being willing to improve as you go. Which brings us back to this next story. At the 1976 Olympic trials, held again that June in Eugene, Nike had a chance, a fantastic chance, to make a good show. We never had that chance with Tiger, whose spikes were in top caliber. We never had the chance with the first generation of Nike products. Now, at last, we had our own stuff, and it was really good. Top quality marathon shoes and spikes. So their first shoes were pretty bad, maybe even unusable by today's standards. But that didn't stop them. They still sold them. They still showed up, and they worked tirelessly to make them better. And as I'm saying this, part of me can't help but think, yeah, but that was back then. The world has changed. It's crowded now. It feels like there's no room left to start messy or small. But then again, we're still human, right? And human nature hasn't changed that much. We still learn the same way, by messing up, by adjusting, and by trying again. Like David Senra says in Founders Podcast, history doesn't repeat itself. Human nature does. So no, what we do at first won't be perfect. But that's not a reason to stop. It's a reason to keep going and to improve. And that brings us to lesson number 10. Sometimes you will blow it. You will mess up, maybe even badly. But that won't be the end of your life or your story. And one of the best examples of that is what happened with Phil Knight and Onitsuka back in 1974. As the plaintiffs, we presented our case first. And this is a case in court with lawyers and judge and everything in between. We presented our case first, and the first witness we called was the founder and president of Blue Ribbon, Philip H. Knight. Walking to the stand, I felt as if it must be some other Philip Knight being called. Some other Philip Knight now raising his hand, swearing to tell the truth in a case marked by so much deceit and rancor. I was floating above my body, watching the scene unfold far below. I told myself as I settled deep into the creaky wooden chair in the witness stand and straightened my necktie, this is the most important account you'll ever give of yourself. Don't blow it. And then I blew it. I was every bit as bad as I'd been in the depositions. I was even a little worse. And actually, as you keep reading through that chapter about the Onitsuka case, it really starts to feel like everything is falling apart. Like he's not just going to lose the case, he's going to lose the company, his reputation, his honor, his house, everything he's been building. And yet, somehow, he finds a way through it. It reminded me of something much closer to home, something I experienced with a friend of mine. As med students, we carry so much pressure. We're scared. Scared of failing, scared of not becoming who we hope to be, scared of letting others down. And just before an important exam, I remember telling her how afraid I was. She looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You know what? I've realized that no matter what happens, no matter how bad things feel, it always works out in the end. That one sentence said so casually stayed with me, because honestly, that might be one of the wisest things I've ever heard. Lesson number 11 builds on that. In any business, money is probably going to be your biggest headache. It's a constant battle, and Phil Knight went through it for years. One of the key takeaways is you have to pay yourself first. And by that, he doesn't mean lying in your own pockets. He means taking care of the business, making sure it has what it needs to breathe, to grow, and to stay alive. And later that ties into the fear of going public and selling shares of the company in the stock market, a moment Phil dreaded. But what this really shows is how money wasn't just an early obstacle. It remained one of Phil's biggest struggles all the way through, even after years of growth and success. It never fully stopped being a challenge. As he says, as we'd begin scrapping together our available cash, writing checks with barely enough to cover them, we'd start to sweat. The Nisho, or Niso, I'm not sure about that, but I'll just say Nisho for now. And maybe someone could help me out with that. The Nisho payment was sometimes so big that we'd be dead broke for a day or two. Then every other creditor would have to wait. Too bad for them, I'd tell Hayes. I know, he'd say. Pay Nisho first. Hayes didn't like the state of affair. It was hard on his nerves. So what do you want to do? I'd ask him. Slow down? Which would always draw a guilty smile. Silly question. Occasionally, when our cash reserves were really stretched thin, our account at the bank wouldn't just be empty, it would be overdrawn. Nisho was this business and investing firm, a key partner that played a massive role in Nike's journey. And what's striking is how these kinds of stories about near misses, tension, last minute saves repeat themselves over and over throughout the book until finally they went public. Something they never really wanted to do, mostly out of fear. Fear of losing control over the company they had poured their lives into, right? In early 1976, the four of us had talked tentatively about going public and tabled the idea. Now, at the close of 1976, we took up the idea again, more seriously. We analyzed the risks, weighed the cons, considered the pros, the factory we could lease, the talent we could hire. But going public would change our culture, make us beholden, make us corporate. That's not our play, we all agreed. And then a couple of pages after, he says, if we couldn't sustain growth, we couldn't survive. And despite our fears, despite the risks and downsides, going public was the best way to sustain growth. Going public. On one level, of course, the idea made perfect sense. Going public would generate a ton of money in a flash. But it would also be highly perilous because going public often meant losing control. Going public could turn us overnight into the thing we loathed, the thing we'd spend our lives running from. For me, there was an added consideration, a semantic one. Defined by shyness, intensely private, I found that phrase itself off-putting. Going public? No thank you. I really love that. Now let's talk about leading, about building something with soul, creating a beautiful work culture, and surrounding yourself with people who believe in what you're building just as much as you do. That's what lesson 12 is about. There's this powerful story about the athlete Frank Shorter during the Olympics. He was supposed to wear Nikes but didn't. Muggy Montreal was the setting for Nike's grand debut, our Olympic coming out party. As those 1976 games opened, we had athletes in several high-profile events wear Nikes. But our highest hopes and most of our money were pinned on Shorter. He was the favorite to win gold, which meant that Nikes, for the first time ever, were going to cross. I woke up early that Saturday, July 31st, 1976. Right after my morning coffee, I took up my position in my recliner. I had a sandwich at my elbow, cold sodas in the fridge. I wondered if Kitami was watching. I wonder if my former bankers were watching. I wonder if my parents and sisters were watching. I wondered if the FBI was watching. And I'll leave that FBI story for you to read in the book. The runners approached the starting line. I probably had as much adrenaline in my system as Shorter had in his. I waited for the pistol and for the inevitable close-up of Shorter's feet. The camera zoomed in. I stopped breathing. I slid out of my recliner into the floor and crawled toward the TV screen. No, I said. No, I cried in anguish. No, no. He was wearing tigers. And I switched from soda to vodka. Sitting in the dark, clutching a cocktail, I told myself it was no big deal in the grand scheme of things. Shorter didn't even win. An East German surprised him and took the gold. Of course, I was lying to myself. It was a very big deal. Not because of the disappointment or the lost marketing opportunity. If watching Shorter go off in shoes other than mine could affect me so deeply, it was now official. Nike was more than just a shoe. I no longer simply made Nikes. Nikes were making me. If I saw an athlete choose another shoe, if I saw anyone choose another shoe, it wasn't just a rejection of the brand alone, but of me. I told myself to be reasonable. Not everyone in the world was going to wear Nike. And I won't say that I became upset every time I saw someone walking down the street in a running shoe that wasn't mine, but it definitely registered, and I didn't care for it. At some point that night, I phoned Hollister. He was devastated too. There was raw anger in his voice. I was glad. I wanted people working for me who would feel that same burn, that same gut punch rejection. And that's really the goal, isn't it? To find people who feel just as deeply about the product as you do. People who care, who are just as invested, who carry the mission with the same pride and purpose, And closely tied to that is the question of leadership. What it means to lead, not just with authority, but with heart. Phil says, but then I think, whatever I'm doing, it must be working. Because mutinities are few. In fact, ever since Bork, no one had thrown a genuine tantrum about anything, not even what they were paid, which is unheard of in any company, big or small. The butt faces knew I wasn't paying myself much, and they trusted that I was paying them what I could. Clearly, the butt faces liked the culture I'd created. I trusted them wholly, and didn't look over their shoulders. And that bred a powerful two-way loyalty. My management style wouldn't have worked for people who wanted to be guided every step. But this group found it liberating, empowering. I let them be, let them do, let them make their own mistakes. Because that's how I'd always liked people to treat me. When you find people who are just as invested as you are, people who love the work, who believe in the mission, who show up with the same fire in their eyes, and you treat them the way you'd want to be treated, something rare begins to take shape. The culture becomes something sacred, something magnetic, and somewhere along the way, colleagues stop feeling like colleagues. They become family. Buttface referred to both the retreat and the retreaters, and it not only captured the informal mood of those retreats, where no idea was too sacred to be mocked and no person was too important to be ridiculed, it also summed up the company's spirit, mission, and ethos. Typically, Woodall and Johnson would fly out from the East Coast, and we'd all drive out to Sun River late Friday. We'd reserve a bunch of cabins, seize a conference room, and spend 2 or 3 days shouting ourselves hoarse. I can see myself so clearly at the head of a conference table, shouting, being shouted at, laughing until my voice was gone. The problems confronting us were grave, complex, seemingly insurmountable, made more so by the fact we were separated from each other by 3,000 miles at a time when communication wasn't easy or instant. And yet, we were always laughing. Sometimes after a really cathartic guffaw, I'd look around the table and feel overcome by emotion, camaraderie, loyalty, gratitude, even love, surely love. But I also remember feeling shocked that these were the men I'd assembled. These were the founding fathers of a multi-million-dollar company that sold athletic shoes, a paralyzed guy, 2 morbidly obese guys, a chain-smoking guy. Undoubtedly, we looked to any casual observer like a sorry, motley crew, hopelessly mismatched. But in fact, we were more alike than different. And that gave a coherence to our goals and our efforts. We were mostly Oregon guys, which was important. We had an inborn need to prove ourselves, to show the world that we weren't hicks and hayseeds. And we were nearly all merciless self-loathers, which kept the egos in check. There was none of this smart guy in the room foolishness. Hayes, Strasser, Woodall, Johnson, each would have been the smartest guy in any room, but none believed it of himself or the next guy. Our meetings were defined by contempt, disdain, and heaps of abuse. There's something else I want to touch on, which is parenting. In the book, time and time again, you see how the business, for all its successes, created distant in his role as a father. It's a recurring theme, a lesson that echoes through the pages. No matter how hard you try, balancing the demands of a growing business and being present for your family can sometimes pull you into 2 different directions. He says, holding it together wasn't the same thing as being a good father. I'd always promised myself that I'd be a better father to my sons than my father had been to me, meaning I'd give them more explicit approval, more attention. But in late 1977, when I evaluated myself honestly, when I looked at how much time I was spending away from the boys, and how distant I was even when I was home, I gave myself low marks. Going strictly by the numbers, I could only say that I was 10% better than my father had been with me. Then I'd fall back to my former routine, the only way I knew, not hands-off, but not hands-on. This might have been the one problem I couldn't solve by brainstorming with my fellow buttfaces. Vastly trickier than how to get midsoles from point A to point B was the question of son A and son B. how to keep them happy while keeping Sun C, Nike, afloat. And then he reflects on his own parents' approach to parenting, a different kind of influence that shaped him. Visiting Alberto, walking into the lobby of St. Vincent's, I was overcome with visions of both my parents. I felt them at my elbow, at my ears. Theirs was a strained relationship, I believe. But as with an iceberg, everything was below the surface. In their house on Claiborne Street, the tension was concealed, and calm and reason almost always prevailed because of their love for us. Love wasn't spoken or shown, but it was there, always. My sisters and I grew up knowing that both parents, different as they were from each other and from us, cared. That's their legacy. That's their lasting victory. One of the final lessons I want to touch on, lesson 15, is about business. It seems wrong to call it business. It seems wrong to throw all those hectic days and sleepless nights, all those magnificent triumphs and desperate struggles, under that bland, generic banner, business. What we were doing felt like so much more. Each new day brought 50 new problems, 50 tough decisions that needed to be made right now. And we were always acutely aware that one rash move, one wrong decision, could be the end. The margin for error was forever getting narrower, while the stakes were forever creeping higher. And none of us wavered in the belief that stakes didn't mean money. For some, I realize, business is the all-out pursuit of profits. Period, full stop. But for us, business was no more about making money than being human is about making blood. Yes, the human body needs blood. It needs to manufacture red and white cells and platelets and redistribute them evenly, smoothly to all the right places on time or else. But that day-to-day business of the human body isn't our mission as human beings. It's a basic process that enables our higher aims, and life always strives to transcend the basic process of living. And at some point, in the late 1970s, I did too. I redefined winning, expanded it beyond my original definition of not losing, of merely staying alive. That was no longer enough to sustain me or my company. We wanted, as all great businesses do, to create, to contribute, and we dared to say so aloud. When you make something, when you improve something, when you deliver something, when you add some new thing or service to the lives of strangers, making them happier, or healthier, or safer, or better, and when you do it all crisply and efficiently, the way everything should be done but so seldom is, you're participating more fully in the whole grand human drama. More than simply alive, you're helping others to live more fully. And if that's business, alright, call me a businessman. Maybe it will grow on me. And finally, let's wrap up the lessons from this book with lesson number 16, which is about regret. I think about the few things I want to do. Help a couple of universities change the world. Help find a cure for cancer. Besides that, it's not so much things I want to do as things I'd like to say. And maybe unsay. It might be nice to tell the story of Nike. Everyone else has told the story or tried to, but they always get half the facts, if that, and none of the spirit, or vice versa. I might start the story or end it with regrets. The hundreds, maybe thousands of bad decisions. Not being a good enough manager to avoid layoffs. Of course, above all, I regret not spending more time with my sons. And yet I know that this regret clashes with my secret regret, that I can't do it all over again. God, how I wish I could relive the whole thing. Short of that, I'd like to share the experience, the ups and downs, so that some young men or women somewhere going through the same trials and ordeals might be inspired or comforted or warned. Some young entrepreneur, maybe some athlete or painter or novelist might press on. It's all the same drive, the same dream. It would be nice to help them avoid the typical discouragement. I'd tell them to hit pause, think long and hard about how they want to spend their time, and with whom they want to spend it for the next 40 years. I tell men and women in their mid-20s not to settle for a job or a profession or even a career. Seek a calling. Even if you don't know what that means, seek it. If you're following your calling, the fatigue will be easier to bear. The disappointment will be fuel. The highs will be like nothing you've ever felt. I'd like to warn the best of them, the iconoclasts, the innovators, the rebels, that they will always have a bullseye on their backs. The better they get, the bigger the bullseyes. It's not one man's opinion, it's a law of nature. I'd like to publicly acknowledge the power of luck. Athletes get lucky, poets get lucky, businesses get lucky. Hard work is critical, a good team is essential. Brains and determination are invaluable. But luck may decide the outcome. Some people might not call it luck. Put it this way, the harder you work, the better your Tao. So much to do, so much to learn, so much I don't know about my own life. And it's true, there's always more to discover. Speaking of which, in episode 7 of the podcast, I talked about the 12-week year and how we should stop thinking in terms of 12 months and instead focus on 12 weeks. Well, a couple of weeks ago, my first 12-week year came to an end, and I started another new year. The whole idea of the 12-week year is to pack as much as we can into a few months, and then repeat the process again and again. So I want to reflect on a few things I've achieved in the past 12 weeks, to decide whether the 12-week framework is truly worth it, and if it's something we should keep embracing. So I set myself 6 goals, even though I knew I should have kept it to 3 or 4 big ones. The first goal was to write at least 4 episodes for the podcast. I'm happy to say I wrote and recorded 2 of them and started writing the other 2. Not quite done yet, but progress is progress, right? The second goal was to post 12 reels on Instagram. And despite the challenge, despite the exhaustion, despite the lack of time, I stuck with it and managed to keep it up. When it came to studying, the goal was simple. Ace my exams and study as much as possible. And by the grace of Allah, I handled that one as well. For German, I aimed to do 1 grammar lesson a day, learn 25 new words with Anki flashcards, and practice 1 B2 exam a week, and keep up with daily journaling, speaking with ChatGPT, and listening to or watching something in German. That was too much, and I did my best, but I didn't quite hit the mark on everything. Not every day had a grammar lesson, and 25 words were too ambitious for me. I barely stuck with 5. But the journaling, speaking, and listening, those became regular habits. Even if listening and watching still felt and feels like a struggle. I've also started reading regularly, which has been a nice addition. For my fitness goals, I began the hypertrophy phase of my training. The hypertrophy being the bulking season, the season where I put on mass or put on muscle. So I began the hypertrophy phase, followed by a quick cut. The cut was about 1 week or so. After getting an in-body analysis, I realized I was actually lacking in fat. So I stopped the cut and started another hypertrophy or bulking phase. The biggest setback, though, was my YouTube medical videos. My plan was to post at least 3 YouTube shorts and 1 long-form video. Unfortunately, nothing, and I mean nothing, got posted. I worked on a lot of things at once. I've written a couple of scripts, but didn't finish anything on that front. And so that's definitely something I need to improve in the next 12 weeks. So despite the ups and downs, starting the 12-week year really helped me clarify my goals and stay focused compared to the yearly resolution. By seeing them every week and planning accordingly, I was able to keep my vision sharp. It helped me stay on track and reminded me of the bigger picture, at least once a week. And for that reason, I'm committed to continuing the 12-week year. And I truly believe it could benefit you too. At least give it a try, and you'll see for yourself. I think this is a great note to end on. If you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast or YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate it if you did. Your support goes a long way in motivating me to keep chasing my hero and sharing this journey with you. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take care and keep chasing your hero.